Okay, picture this, right? It's freezing outside, you're finally home and ready to relax, but then, uh-oh, your boiler throws an error code at you. Talk about a major bummer. So today we're going to deep dive into boiler error codes, to help you guys decipher those cryptic messages and maybe even avoid a panicked call to the plumber in the middle of the night. We found this awesome article by, let me see, a UK property maintenance company, and it is packed with helpful tips.
You
So,
know what's really interesting about these error codes? They're actually designed to help you out. It's kind of like your boiler's trying to tell you what's up, but in its own special language.
okay, I get that, but honestly, sometimes it feels more like a secret code than like a helpful message. So, can we break it down? Like, really, what are those boiler error codes trying to tell us?
Well, you can think of them as um, little alarm bells going off in your boiler. When something goes wrong, the boiler uses a specific code to basically say, hey, something's not right here.
Gotcha. So, it could be something, I don't know, like simple, like low pressure or something way more complicated.
It's exactly.
The article actually jumps right into a few of the most common issues, and it looks like overheating is a pretty big one, right?
Oh, absolutely. When your boiler gets too hot, it triggers this safety shutdown to protect itself.
Hmm.
And you'll usually see an error code like E110 or E125, something like that. But those codes, they can vary a little bit depending on, well, on what brand of boiler you've got.
Right, of course, safety first. But I'm curious, like, what would even cause a boiler to overheat like that in the first place?
Well, there could be a few different culprits.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's something as simple as like air trapped in the system, like how radiators can get cold at the top if there's air stuck in them. It's kind of the same idea with your boiler.
Hmm.
Other times, though, it might be a problem with the pump that circulates the water, or maybe even a faulty thermostat.
So, okay, let's say you see one of these overheating codes pop up. What do you do? Is it like a DIY situation, or do you need to call
Hmm.
for backup?
Well, there are a few things you can try yourself before you call in the professionals. The article suggests, first things first, turn off the boiler completely and let it cool down. Then you can try bleeding your radiators to release any of that trapped air we were talking about. Sometimes that simple fix is all you need.
Okay, cool. That actually rings a bell. I remember my dad doing that when I was a kid. But what if you bleed the radiators and that pesky error code pops up again?
Hmm. Well, that might be a sign that something a bit more complex is going on. It could be, like a faulty part that needs replacing, and that's definitely a job for a qualified heating engineer.
Ah,
You don't want to mess around with like gas or electrical stuff unless you really know what you're doing.
good point. Safety first, for sure. The article also mentions pressure problems, and they use this interesting analogy comparing a boiler to a car, which I thought was kind of cool. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure, yeah. So just like your car needs the right tire pressure to run properly, your boiler needs the right water pressure to function correctly. If the pressure gets too low, it can cause all sorts of problems, and that's usually when you see error codes like E119 show up. High pressure is, well, it's less common, but it can happen too. In that case, you'll likely see a different code, maybe something like E117.
So how can you tell if your boiler pressure is like, out of whack?
Most boilers will have this pressure gauge right on the front. It usually has like a green zone that shows you the ideal pressure range.
Yeah.
It's really important to check that gauge regularly, especially during the colder months when your boiler's working overtime.
Yeah, that makes sense. The article actually has this really cool case study about a homeowner in London who had a low pressure issue, and they were able to fix it themselves in like no time.
Oh yeah, that's a great example. They use the filling loop, which is basically this valve that lets you add more water to the system. It's a pretty simple process, but you do have to make sure you follow the instructions carefully and don't, overfill it. But it is pretty awesome to be able to tackle those little issues yourself, don't you think?
It really is like that feeling of, hey, I can actually fix this thing.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, we've covered overheating, pressure problems, but what happens when your boiler just point blank refuses to light up?
Yes, the dreaded ignition failure. That can definitely be frustrating. Usually you'll see a code like E133 or EA227 or something similar, if that's the case.
Yeah.
And there could be a few different things causing it. It could be a faulty ignition system, a problem with your gas supply, or even, believe it or not, something as simple as a frozen condensate pipe.
Wait, hold on. A frozen pipe can stop your boiler from working.
Rally.
Oh, absolutely, especially in really cold weather. That condensate pipe, which carries away this acidic water that's produced during the heating process, it can actually freeze up. And if that happens, well, it triggers a safety shutdown. and your boiler just won't start.
Huh, I never knew that. But the article actually has a really handy tip for dealing with frozen condensate pipes.
Yeah, if you think that might be the issue, you can try carefully pouring some hot water over the pipe to thaw it out. Just make sure it's hot but not boiling. A hairdryer can work too, in a pinch.
Wow, that's a great tip. So simple, but I would have never thought of that.
Exactly, and that's why understanding these error codes is so important, It gives you the knowledge to take action and maybe even save yourself from a bigger headache down the line.
Totally. So we've covered overheating, pressure problems, ignition failures, but let's be real, sometimes those error codes are just like completely baffling. What about those weird sensor and communication errors that just leave you scratching your head?
Yeah, those can be tricky, even for experienced engineers sometimes. A code like E256 or F75 often means there's a problem with one of the boiler sensors.
Sensors, like what kind of sensors are we talking about here?
Well, boilers are packed with these little sensors that monitor all sorts of things like the temperature, pressure, water flow. If one of those sensors goes haywire, it can mess up the whole system and trigger an error code. And then sometimes those cryptic codes might be pointing to a communication problem between the boiler's control panel and its other parts.
Okay, so if you run into something like that, how do you even begin to troubleshoot it? Is it even worth trying to fix it yourself?
The article have a few suggestions. First, you want to check for any blockages in, like the valves or pipes, and make sure the pump is running smoothly. And sometimes good old bleeding the radiators can help with this too. But if you try those basic things and you're still getting that error code, it's probably best to call in a professional.
Makes sense. Some things are just better left to the pros. But speaking of pros, I love how this article actually breaks things down by different boiler brands. It even lists brand-specific error codes, which is super helpful. It's like having a personalized troubleshooting guide.
It really is a great resource. For example, Valiant boilers often use codes like F27 and F75, while glowworm boilers tend to display E20 for low pressure. Ideal logic boilers, they often show L2 or F1 for the same issue. And then you've got Baxi boilers with their own little quirks like E25 for ignition problems and T17 for issues with the heating return sensor.
Wow, that's a lot of codes to keep track of. But it's pretty amazing how much variation there is between different brands. Okay, so we've learned a lot about error codes and how to troubleshoot them. But even with all this knowledge, how do you know when it's like time to throw in the towel and just call a heating engineer?
That's a really important question. And it's kind of a judgment call, but there are definitely some red flags that tell you it's time to call in reinforcements. First off, if you've tried troubleshooting the problem and it just keeps coming back, that's a pretty good sign that something more serious might be going on.
So it's like your boiler's trying to tell you, hey, I need a doctor. What else should people be on the lookout for?
If an error code keeps popping up no matter what you do, or if you start noticing like unusual smells or sounds coming from your boiler or any leaks, those are all signs that you need to call a professional, like ASP. And of course, if you ever think there might be a gas leak, you need to get out of the house immediately and call the National Gas Emergency Service right away.
Absolutely. No messing around when it comes to gas safety. Better safe than sorry. Speaking of safety and prevention, the article really emphasizes the importance of getting your boiler serviced regularly.
Oh, it's absolutely crucial. Think of it like taking your car in for a tune-up. Just like your car needs regular maintenance to run smoothly and avoid major breakdowns, your boiler needs regular servicing to make sure it's running efficiently and safely.
So true. So knowing these error codes is a great first step, but having a well-maintained boiler is the key to, a nice, warm, and worry-free winter.
Couldn't agree more. Regular servicing can actually save you money in the long run by preventing costly repairs and making your boiler last longer. It's a win-win.
This has been super insightful so far. We've already learned so much. I think it's time for us to take a little break, let all this information sink in. But don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we'll continue our deep dive into this awesome article. We've got even more tips and insights to share with you guys. All right, so we've talked a lot about troubleshooting, when things go wrong with your boiler. But what about being more proactive? The article mentions these boiler cover plans. Are they actually worth it?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on your own situation, right? Some people, they prefer to kind of self-insure and just handle any repairs as they come up. And then others, they really like the peace of mind that comes with knowing they've got coverage if something unexpected happens.
Makes sense. So what are the main things you should think about when you're deciding if a boiler cover plan is right for you?
Well, The age of your boiler is a big one, for sure. And the condition it's in. If you have an older boiler that's maybe a little bit prone to acting up, having a cover plan could potentially save you a bunch of money over time. But if you have a newer boiler that's been pretty reliable, you might feel comfortable, just handling repairs yourself if they come up.
Yeah. The article also mentions that some plans include an annual service as part of the package, which sounds like a pretty sweet deal.
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. Having that annual service built in can be a huge plus because it ensures your boiler is getting like regular checkups. And that
Mm.
can really help prevent those unexpected breakdowns in the first place.
Right. So it's kind of like an insurance policy, but for your heating system. Plus, you get that preventative care on top of it. That's pretty smart. What about the cost of these plans, though? Are they, like, generally affordable?
You can find plans starting from around, I think, like £8 a month. But the price can go up depending on, well, how much coverage you want, the age of your boiler, and the type of boiler you have, too. It's definitely worth shopping around and comparing different plans to find one that fits your budget and your needs.
Are there any downsides to these boiler cover plans, though? Anything people should be aware of?
That's a great question. It's always important to read the fine print, make sure you really understand what's covered and what's not covered by the plan. Some plans, they might have like a limit on how many times you can call them out in a year, or they might not cover certain types of repairs. And you definitely want to choose a company that's reputable, one that has a good track record of taking care of their customers.
So do your homework. Make sure you pick a company that you trust. But I can see how having that extra layer of protection, especially for, like, those boiler emergencies that seem to happen at the worst possible time, I can see how that would be really valuable for a lot of people.
Oh, for sure. It's that peace of mind,
Yeah.
knowing that you don't have to stress if something goes wrong with your heating, especially during those freezing winter months when you really need it to work.
This whole deep dive has really got me thinking about, like, taking better care of my boiler. It's not just about fixing things when they break. It's about, taking those steps to prevent problems in the first place.
Absolutely. It's a bit like looking after your own health, isn't it? Prevention is always better than cure.
That's a great way to put it. It's easy to forget about your boiler until it stops working. But just like with our own health, a little TLC goes a long way.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be complicated,
Yeah.
Just doing those simple things like checking the pressure gauge every now and then, bleeding your radiators, and making sure you get that annual service can make a world of difference.
So now that we've talked about all of this, what are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that those error codes, they're not something to be scared of. They're actually there to help you. They're like clues that can guide you when you're trying to figure out what's wrong.
Right. Instead of freaking out when you see those flashing lights, you can kind of think of it as your boiler trying to tell you what it needs.
Exactly. And once you know what those codes mean, you can take the right steps to fix the problem.
Yeah, and another takeaway, I think, is that a little knowledge can go a long way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, by just like reading your boiler's manual and learning some basic troubleshooting steps, you can often fix those small issues yourself, which saves you time and money.
Right. It's all about taking control.
But it's also important to know your limits, right? Like when to just call in the professionals.
Oh, absolutely. Safety always comes first. If you're dealing with gas or if you're just not sure about something, it's always best to call a qualified engineer.
Right. They have the training and the experience to handle those like more complicated issues and make sure everything is working safely and efficiently. So, what other advice would you give to homeowners who want to be more proactive about, taking care of their boilers?
Well, as we've already talked about, getting your boiler serviced regularly is super important. It's an investment, in your home and your peace of mind. It's much easier and less expensive to prevent those problems from happening in the first place than to fix them after they've already caused damage.
Totally agree. And while we're talking about prevention, what about those boiler cover plans? What's your final verdict on those?
Well, I think that it can be a really good option for some people, especially for folks with older boilers or for people who just, like having that extra peace of mind.
Yeah.
But you do want to make sure you do your research and find a reputable company with a plan that actually covers what you need and that fits your budget.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I feel like I've learned so much about how my boiler works and how to keep it running smoothly. But before we wrap up, I'm curious about the future. What's next for boilers? Are there any cool new developments or innovations on the horizon that homeowners should be aware of?
Ooh, that's a great question. Always love hearing about the latest and greatest tech. So what does the future hold for our boilers? What's coming down the pipeline?
Well, the industry is definitely, it's moving towards smarter, more efficient systems. We're already seeing more and more of those smart thermostats and boilers that you can control right from your phone.
Oh yeah, those are pretty cool.
Uh,
What are the biggest advantages of those smart systems? One of the biggest perks is, well, they can really help you save energy. Smart thermostats, they learn your habits and adjust the temperature so you're not wasting energy heating an empty house. And they can even send you alerts if there's a potential problem, like, a sudden drop in pressure or if the temperature's acting weird.
So not only are they convenient, but they can actually help you save money on your energy bills.
Makes it.
That's a win-win for sure. Are there any other like cutting edge advancements that you're particularly excited about?
One area that's really, really interesting is the development of hydrogen boilers. As we're all trying to move towards a more sustainable future, hydrogen is, well, it's becoming a really promising alternative to natural gas.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about hydrogen boilers, but I gotta admit, I don't really know much about them. How do they even work?
They're actually pretty similar to traditional gas boilers, but instead of burning natural gas, they burn hydrogen. And the cool thing is the combustion process only produces water vapor, so it's a really clean and environmentally friendly option.
Wow, so they're basically zero emission boilers. That's amazing.
Exactly. They can really significantly reduce carbon emissions, which is, super important for tackling climate change.
Are these hydrogen boilers like available to buy now?
They're still kind of in the early stages of development, but there are a bunch of manufacturers who are working on prototypes and pilot programs. It might be a few years before they're widely available to everyone, but I think they have the potential to, really revolutionize the heating industry.
It's pretty exciting to think about what the future holds. Imagine a world where our homes are heated with clean, sustainable energy. That would be awesome. Okay, so speaking of the future, let's talk a little bit about communication. The article really stresses the importance of clear communication, not just from your boiler to you, but also between you and your heating engineer. Why is that so important?
Oh, it can make a huge difference when you call an engineer for a repair. Being able to clearly explain what's going on can save everyone a ton of time and hassle.
So, what kind of information should you have ready when you call an engineer?
Well, first things first, you want to make sure you know the make and model of your boiler. That'll help the engineer figure out, what parts they might need and what procedures to follow.
Right. It's kind of like going to the doctor and knowing your medical history. It helps them give you the best care.
Exactly. And you should also be prepared to describe, what's happening with your boiler, what error codes are you seeing, are there any strange sounds or smells? Has your heating or hot water completely stopped working? Or is it just, not working as well as it used to? The more information you can give them, the better.
And don't be shy about asking questions, right? Like if you don't understand something, just ask your engineer to explain it in a way that makes sense to you.
Absolutely. Any good engineer will be happy to clarify things and make sure you understand what's going on. Remember, it's your home and your boiler, so you have the right to be in the loop.
I think a lot of people get kind of intimidated by all the technical jargon and they don't want to ask questions, but it's so important to be involved and make sure you feel good about the solutions they're proposing.
I couldn't agree more. Communication goes both ways, right? It's not just about the homeowner giving information to the engineer. It's also about the engineer, explaining things clearly and answering any questions the homeowner might have.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. We've covered so much ground today, from deciphering error codes to uh, troubleshooting common problems and even exploring the future of boiler technology.
It has been a really interesting deep dive, and I hope everyone listening feels a bit more confident about, taking care of their boilers and keeping their homes warm and cozy all winter long.
Me too. I know I feel a lot more prepared to handle those error codes now. And most importantly, I think we've both learned that regular maintenance and, just being proactive is really the key to a happy and healthy boiler.
Absolutely. Prevention is key, just like with our own health.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into boiler air codes, what's the one piece of advice you would give to our listeners?
I would say don't be afraid of your boiler. Get to know it, learn its little quirks, and stay on top of maintenance. Your boiler will thank you for it, and you'll be rewarded with a warm and comfortable home for years to come.
That's great advice. And remember, if you're ever in doubt, don't hesitate to call a qualified heating engineer. They're there to help you keep your boiler running smoothly and safely. Thanks for joining us on this informative journey, and until next time, stay warm and stay curious.